Hi, everyone. Kumar Dattatreyan here with Agile Meridian and the Meridian Point. And welcome to another episode of our show on disruption and innovation. Today, we're thrilled to have Daniela Fajardo with us. Daniela, she's going to correct me if I say the name wrong, I'm sure. Daniela is a seasoned business process analyst with a passion for optimizing operations and driving value for organizations. With her expertise in business process management, change management, and cross-functional collaboration, Daniela has consistently delivered impressive results throughout her career. Please join us as we explore her insights on disruption, innovation, and service to her clients. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Daniela on stage. Hi, Daniela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today.
Of course. Thank you for being here. So, business process management, you and I had a conversation about this before, and it's interesting because a lot of what you do is improve a process, improve how people work together, I'm assuming. Yeah. Would you tell the audience, at least that's my interpretation of it, but would you tell the audience what is business process management from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you so much. So this is something that's very interesting to me because, for me, the way I see it is the key to a company's success is not its individual pieces, but really how are they connected to each other? So, there's a lot of business improvement, process optimization, process monitoring, design, modeling, so much more. But one of the things that people often miss is what is the current state of your business process. And that's the part that I love the most, because if you think about it from a personal perspective, it's really, in order for you to grow, are you assessing yourself, where you are right now, what you're doing in order to grow? So similarly for companies, you have to understand your baseline, what's your foundation, because once you understand that and what each role is doing, and when they understand role clarity, then it's easier to be able to move on to the next stage of processes or business process management.
That makes a lot of sense. So basically, you are sort of like a doctor. You go in and you assess how things work. You sort of understand all the, where it's working well, where people are connecting and collaborating, and where it's not working well. And it's not just the people, but it's also the tools, the systems that people use to do their work, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think about it as two things here, really. The first one is systems don't talk to systems, people talk to systems. So in that way, it's really important to build those, documents around the processes so that people can understand what it is that they're doing in the process. So the second portion is, the analogy I always think about is your pantry. If you're going to go make a meal, you don't automatically go to the grocery store to buy all the ingredients. You have to look at what's in your pantry to see if you already have some of those ingredients, because if you don't, you're going to spend so much time at the grocery store. You're going to spend money at the grocery store. And when you come back home, you're going to say, oh my gosh, I already had, mustard, tomatoes, onions. So I wasted, so much time and money, and now there's duplicate, ingredients. So when you think about it from a process perspective, that's why you always have to have your baseline, understand that, so that you don't have those redundancies, so that you can have those efficiencies. So
yeah, I love the analogy of the pantry. Because I'm one of these people, when I go to the store, any store, grocery store, I just pick up things because I'm like, oh, it looks good. I don't think we have any. Let's buy this. Let's buy that. And
I'm guilty. Every time we have a cookout, I'm like, we need mayo, and I go buy mayo. But when I come home, I have
already have mayo.
Lots of mayo. I didn't need the mayo.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned something that, systems don't talk to systems, people talk to systems. You're right, but a lot of our systems today do talk to other systems. And how do you get a sense of whether the information they're passing on to other systems through APIs, through interfaces, through whatever, is serving the purpose as part of a process assessment?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for bringing that up. So the way I see it is, even if systems are being integrated with each other, and they do talk to each other, to some extent, but there's the human aspect of somebody has to put data into a system for those systems to talk to each other, and therefore for somebody else, for somebody else to look at the data or the output of that data. So that's kind of to clarify why I said that. And then can you mention the second question you just mentioned again?
I think that was it. I don't know if I mentioned the second one. I think it was really just about system to system communication, because, companies are spending a lot of money on AI and automation and all these things that, AI on the decision points, where a human would normally make a decision, you can start to introduce AI into those decision points to speed up the process so a human isn't needed necessarily to make that decision. And how does that impact your assessment, if you will, of the process, the tools, the people, and how they all work together?
Yeah. So we can think about it from a Salesforce perspective. So in Salesforce, there's sometimes chatbots that you can, enter, hey, can I have this process? And then it'll start feeding you the information. And then that is where the human component comes into place. And, a lot of the governance portion comes in as well. In order for the systems to be able to talk to each other, somebody on the other end has to be maintaining and updating that information. Otherwise, the person who's receiving that information is not going to receive the correct data. So, there's always going to be that, human component behind it, even though those systems are talking to each other.
Well, that's a relief. We won't lose our jobs anytime soon. There is the strike, the dock workers strike that's going on right now at the time of this recording. And what they're striking about is automation, taking away their jobs. And I know this is not a question that maybe you're expecting, but I'm curious what your feeling is on that, how automation could really eliminate some people's jobs as part of a process.
Yeah, well, going back to the chatbot example, that is something that is feeding you a lot of the information that you would have asked an actual person. Maybe, like, I don't know, somebody in operations would have that information to provide to you. But on the flip side, if the chatbot is giving you the information that operations would have given you, then somebody in operations is being open, they're getting their time open to do more work on their day-to-day rather than trying to figure out the information to pass it on to you. And I think the reason why people are so scared is because of that, disruption of, well, we don't know how to use this tool. We don't know how to understand how it works. And so I think companies need to make a due diligence to train their people how this is actually beneficial to them, or, just alone to understand how to use those tools so that they don't feel so in distress, and so they can leverage the information, or, how the tool can be used to their advantage.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I know this was beyond the scope of this interview. The whole ship workers, dock workers strike that's going on is it's just another symptom of the impact of technology on business processes. And certainly it affects labor-intensive markets like shipyard, unloading goods and stuff like that. You need humans to do that. And when machines start start to take away those jobs and people get scared, to your point. But maybe there's other jobs that it also creates, and that's something I haven't really even thought about. But back to what you do. You're not helping shipyard workers or dock workers. You're helping businesses assess their current state and then put in improvements in place. Can you share an example of how you've helped a company sort of, you do that initial assessment, you go in there with your stethoscope and you'll listen to the heartbeat of the company and you say, okay, here's what you need to do. Share an example of how that works.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think with the disruption, theme that you have, there was once where I had to do a little bit of disruption between sales and operations. Operations was kind of, holding sales hand every time they asked for a request. So when I stepped in, I kind of assessed, what was happening, what was the dynamic, and I noticed that there was a lot of time spent on the back and forth between those two teams. So, I always love using change management as a way to ease people swiftly, softly into what they should actually be doing to maximize their time. So it was kind of fun for me, maybe not for them, but I started telling operations, hey, this is as simple as you telling them a checklist, send me these 5 things, and only once you send me these 5 things, I will move ahead and do your request. On the flip side, it took a lot for operations to get to that point of, okay, I have to wait to make this whole request happen because I'm still waiting for things to, come through the door. But it was good because then it would put pressure on sales to send that information. On the flip side, it disrupted sales a little bit because they were getting used to just being, like, okay, yes, I can start with this request or, with this first thing from the request or the second thing from the request. But they had to push themselves to do their homework, do your due diligence. And eventually, once they started seeing how much faster the request was happening because operations was pushing and because sales was also, doing their homework, then it just made more sense. There were less frenemies, if you will. They were more friendly to collaborate, communicate, and just move forward a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like a really good outcome that you were able to get from that experience. And it is disruptive, right? When you can take something that takes weeks or months to get through a system and you can reduce that to days or hours even, it can be amazing. People can be like just completely floored by the progress. And I'm quite familiar with stories like that. Right? It's about getting people together that work in different departments that typically don't collaborate, and when they start to collaborate, then the flow of information, the flow of knowledge and stuff speeds everything up. Right. Exactly. And it can be quite an amazing thing.
And if you think about it too, once you have all of that information written down, it's so much easier for somebody new at the company to come in and get trained on that information rather than somebody coming in and, your manager having to sit down with you for a whole week and having to give you all of this training. I'm sure that they want to see this person succeed, so they take the time. But on the flip side, if they have everything written down, then they just have to review it. And if they have questions, that's when they can come to their managers. And, it's a whole thing of tribal information. There's so much in people's brains that is not on paper. So, if somebody goes on vacation or if somebody moves, transitions to another company, that information lives with them. So I'm always like, give me all of your brain, you are my brain trust. I need to pull that from you. And you'll see other cases where, that's one of the ones that people worry about the most. But I've run into cases where I've had to pull information from people's brains who are going to get a promotion or who have bigger, but it's their baby. So, it's another type of disruption to allow them to get comfortable or process, give them the space to think about why this is good for them. Because if you give me all of your brain, I will be able to give that to somebody else who will do your work so that you can have better, bigger responsibilities in your
Yeah.
role. So
that's a good point. When people get promoted, they end up doing for at least for some time, they end up doing their old job and their new job, because what they have in their brain isn't
exactly
well transferred, right?
Exactly.
The thing that you hear is KT sessions, right? Knowledge transfer sessions. And some of that is still needed, but to your point, I think having something written, some documentation that's written can be very helpful. I was talking to a business owner. He used to work for Disney. He was one of my guests on the show probably a couple months ago now. And at Disney, everything has a process and it's all written down. And which is why when you go to a Disney resort, the experience that you get is always good. It's always great, not just good, but it's great. And that's because everyone understands what's expected of them when they're greeting guests, when they're serving guests, when they're in a show or whatever it is, right? They all know exactly what they have to do. And everyone's role is well defined. And so they have the manual. Right. And if there are changes that need to be made, he said this thing he called it plussing meetings. They got together, the team, and they tried to plus the process, make it better, right? Add to it. And so they would take the process, whatever the process was, and look for ways to make it, fine tune it, make it a little bit better. Yeah. So he was telling me all this because he is now a business coach, and this is what he helps his clients with, to document their processes. And certainly what I do with my clients, and it sounds like you're doing the same thing, right? To help them not only understand the process that exists, the current state, but also to then document it, make it better, and then document it.
Yeah, but you know what that makes me think about too? I bet that behind building the process and showing that to the employees, they're doing training and enablement, because you can have all the documents you want, you can have all the processes that you want, but if you don't go back to train your people, enable your people, to have a governance really on it, then people are going to forget. So I feel like it's like exercising a muscle. You're getting reinforcement on something that you already know, but the next time you hear it again, you will, one, learn something new, and two, learn something that you already knew a little bit better. And I think that is key when it comes to then understanding, if I already understand this so well, then that's when we can do the plussing of the processes. So, for me, there's 4 pillars that I always use, and it's always the resources, knowledge management, governance, and metrics and monitoring. And I feel like this is very in tandem with the example that you were telling me, because number one, you have to have those resources. But without the resources, and you go into knowledge management is essentially who's your audience, who are you sending the message to? You can have those two hand in hand. Again, they're pillars. If you don't have one, then, the whole thing breaks. With governance, as we were saying, you can have all the documentation or the resources that you want. You can have all the knowledge management, but if you don't do the governance, the papers are just getting dust on them. So you have to come back around every, build a cadence. It depends on the type of process. If it's really complex, maybe every few months. If it's not as complex, then, by every once a year, or, just every 2 times a year. And then you have metrics and monitoring. The more you work from pillar 1 to pillar 3 and you keep doing that cadence, then that's when the plus comes. You can now finally do the metrics and the monitoring and understand how many people are impacted, how many times is a process being executed in a year, how many roles or handoffs do you have in between. So all to equate to how many people are being affected in that one process for the year. And once you do a little bit of calculations, you will find that you're either doing a great job and, following things along, or you will realize how much time you're, not wasting, but essentially not using well. So it's a lot of, having the intention of each of those things.
Yeah, I love it. Let me shut my shade here since the sun is creeping in.
A few lines.
Yeah, I still have lines, but that's okay. It's interesting. Of the 4 pillars you mentioned, can you elaborate? What are the resources that when you say resources, what do you mean by resources?
By resources, I just mean documents, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason why I started using the word resources was because the more business process management I do, people think that BPM, I'll just call it BPM from here on out, it's all about documentation. And it hurts my heart because it's not. It's so much more than that. It's, like what I was telling you, like the key to a company's success is not its individual pieces, but how they are connected. It is the 4 pillars. It is looking at businesses from the outside in. It is being able to understand the operations of your business, the flow, how people are connected, the roles and responsibilities. Is that understood? But in order to do that, you have to have your resources, aka your documents, everything written down, or a map, in order to understand how your business works. Because once you map it or document it, then it's easier to have a clear understanding on what you can then do in the future.
Yeah, I'm totally tracking with you. You may use different words and different terms, but I do a lot of the same thing. Like you, I call it value stream mapping, and so it's mapping the flow of value through a process. And of course, you have to sort of understand what the process is and what the steps are and who the people are, what systems do they use, how are they using it, and all that stuff. And so, at the conclusion of this process, you can start to you start to understand where the bottlenecks are and where improvements can be made and where documentation needs to be created, things like that. Excuse me. So those are the similarities I see. And I think business process mapping and management maybe goes a little deeper than value stream mapping.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
No,
but I do have a question. Go ahead.
You can think about it in another way too. I have an acronym that helps me put it into perspective, which is the acronym is FLOW. I was thinking one day, like, what's the best way to think of a business that is operationally smooth? So, FLOW just came to mind. And so this is really the formulation of clear in processes, where this really takes training into account. How often are you training, your people? And then lowering redundancies. The more you lower those redundancies, the more efficiencies and optimization you're able to understand and see. Optimizing the efficiency over, in flow. Just being able to understand how can you maximize that timing with what you're doing. And then finally, workplace unity. Just once you do all of this flow and your pillars, I see that there's so much collaboration, there's so much communication, the teams start working together. And I think that that's almost the most important part of everything, because it always goes back to people, it always goes back to humans. The more you kind of tend to them, the more you train them, and the more collaboration there is, then that is when more redundancies are lowered and when they're, the efficiencies are increased essentially. So I think about it sometimes as a flow perspective too, because it makes sense.
Yeah. Can you repeat what the acronym stands for again? Flow?
Yeah. So that's flow. F is for formulating clear written processes. Then we have L, which is for lowering redundancy. Then we have O for optimizing efficiency, and W is for workplace unity, which at the end of the day, it's all about collaboration. I needed the W, but it's really collaboration.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Flock wouldn't flow as well, right? Flock, yeah. Yeah. So I love that. So flow is also something. I mean, it's not an acronym. It's just flow. How do you flow value through your company?
Exactly.
And so that resonates quite well with me. All right, we have time for maybe one more question, and then anything I didn't ask, you can talk about. So again, being the theme around disruption and so on and so forth. What are some of the biggest challenges companies face, if you will, when trying to implement these process changes? Biggest challenges, and how do you help them overcome them?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the first thing that comes to mind is they're being reactive because the nature of the business is asking for it. So I always say, let me be reactive so you can be proactive. The faster that you implement a tool, the slower that, again, it goes back to people, but the slower that your employees or workers are going to understand how to use it. But because the need is so now, and the tool, obviously it's going to do good things, it's going to help speed things up, but you have to help your people understand why you're implementing it, who's going to use it. There's so many different roles, so everybody has to have those clear roles and responsibilities. So I think that's where there's a lot of miscommunication, for a lack of a better word, but it is so important to be able to say, okay, I want to implement this system. Again, let me write my current state processes so that when I do implement a new tool, or I want to go into the most updated version of this tool, then you can look at what you already have and easily start transferring that information or the knowledge management piece, so that when you're going to train or onboard your people, it's just more smooth, or have that flow that we talked about.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm curious, things are changing all the time, rapidly changing, right? Pandemic was a huge change for so many companies. They had to sort of evolve and adapt to everything shutting down, basically, right? And then, of course, you have AI. That's been a pretty disruptive change. What would you say are the key skills that professionals need to develop to stay relevant in this era of rapid change and disruption?
Yeah, so I would say there's so many tools. First of all, I know it can be a little like tool fatigue, but I would say, start with a few tools, learn the basics of each one. There's, AI tools that, it's like you're talking to a person, or there's AI tools that do their videos for you, or they say things for you. We have the chatbots. I mean, there's so many of them. I would say if you learn the basics of one, that's good, because then you'll have a repertoire of information that when you really need something, then you can say, okay, I want to be an expert on this, or I want to learn a little bit more about this so it can help me here. But you'll at least have a baseline understanding of what you can use.
Yeah.
So it's not so overwhelming. And then what was the second part?
That was it. There's only one part. Yeah. What tools and skills, I suppose? Maybe the skills. What sort of skills do people need to develop?
The skills, I would say soft skills here are so important. just because, the more we talk about tools, the more we forget we're humans. So like I would say, managing your expectations. There's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but it's all about managing expectations so you don't have to manage your emotions later on.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that's a good soft skill to have and understand as we start using technology, because guess what? It's moving fast. Like, jump in the train because it's going and like we're not going back. So manage your expectations of how fast or how slow you want to learn about a tool. And then I don't know if you've read this book, but Atomic Habits, to just mention another skill, I would say, or maybe not a skill, but more of a concept. Don't think about having something to the point that it is perfect. It's always about progress. So one key takeaway that I took from that was the 1% that you do every day, it compounds into that progress. So I'm always thinking it's progress, not perfection. Think about that 1% that you can do every day. And I think once you put that concept into a tool, that's when you can really start seeing the compounding effects or the learnings that you can put into that, the skills. So
I love that. There's so many things that we are aligned on. You just use different language than I do. So the whole continuous improvement in the agile and lean community, we call it Kaizen. Kaizen is small improvements over time yield huge outcomes or huge impacts, right? And so you put it in a different way, the 1% improvement every day, over time, it can grow to a lot. It's like the compounding effect of interest, the interest you earn on a bank account. Although 1% interest isn't all that much, but I'm just saying.
I hear you. It's the concept.
It's the concept. It's the concept, right? Yeah. All right. So awesome. Well, what have I not asked you that you would like to say about process improvement or change management, the pillars that you talked about, or maybe just about yourself? How can people get to connect with you or learn from you? The floor is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think one of the, an important piece to take here is using change management, or I guess a little bit of psychology in general, to be able to maneuver through this world of technology is so important. I would say having a culture of collaboration now is so important. So that's always something I keep in mind when I work with teams, to, when I'm showing them the big picture, the as is, or the current state of what they do now, I am taking each one little by little to explain to them, it's like a simple concept. I call it the process to the process, where you start with one role, then you move on to the second role, onto the third role, and so on and so forth. But I want to give each of those roles the love that they need and deserve. And then once I have a full picture of the high level, then I can come back to them and show them, and then they can start putting themselves in each other's shoes. And that's when the collaboration starts happening, with not just the person from role to role, but also the interaction between the person and the tool. So I think that's really something extremely important for companies in general to provide to their employees. If it's a change, if you have a change management department or a business process management department, they should always be talking to each other. And similarly, they should both be learning on how to connect those two, because that's what's going to, I think, help us have those efficiencies in the future.
Makes a lot of sense. Really enjoyed this conversation. I have more questions. It's just I don't know that people would stay for a podcast that would last 2 hours. So I'm sure I could talk to you for 2 hours about this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to have you come back on, and we'll probe other aspects of business process
I would love
management
that.
and change management.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. And, all the podcasts that you have, I recommend others to, watch them too, because it is very interesting what perspectives other people come with. Like you were saying, it's the same type of concept, but you're wording it in a different way.
Yeah.
And sometimes it clicks with different type of messages that people say. So I do encourage everybody to go to your podcast and just listen to all of them, because they're just have
thank
good
you for that.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, language is important, and people, the language may not work in every situation. And so what I'm learning through these podcasts is different ways to express the same thing that people use. And so it's really helping me. You've helped me, so I thank you.
Well, thank me for asking me the question. Thank you for asking me the questions.
Of course. All right. Well, stay tuned for, keep coming back to the show. This has been a wonderful interview with Daniela, and I'm hoping that we can get you back on in the future. We'll see. But thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.